Jenna leaned back in her seat, propping her feet on the dashboard like she did not have a care in the world. I shot her a nervous glance and tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "That's not exactly safe," I muttered under my breath. She rolled her eyes, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I trust you," she said, as if that was supposed to fix everything. "You do not have to micromanage every little thing I do." I clenched my jaw and focused on the road ahead. The last thing I wanted was to set off another argument, not this weekend. This trip was supposed to be our chance to fix things between us, not make them worse. We had not even reached the cabin yet, and I was already wondering if we could survive 3 days alone together without tearing each other apart. If we could not manage this, how were we supposed to survive for the long haul? Thankfully, we reached the cabin without any disasters, and Jenna's knees remained intact. No gruesome accident sending them crashing through the windshield. When we finally stepped out of the car, she seemed in surprisingly good spirits, which gave me some hope. I fumbled with the key and unlocked the front door. As I stepped inside, the look on Jenna's face took me by surprise. There was a spark in her eyes, a glimmer of the joy I had fallen in love with all those years ago. It hit me hard, stirring up an ache deep inside. It had been too long since I had seen her look at anything, or anyone, with that kind of happiness. I hoped, maybe foolishly, that this weekend could bring us back to that place again. "So what do you want to do first?" I asked as I placed the grocery bags on the kitchen counter, but she was already on her way down the hall, ignoring me completely. "This place is adorable," she called from the other room, her voice echoing through the cabin. I grabbed the suitcase and followed her voice to the bedroom, where she knelt in front of the television. "They have a decent stack of movies," she said, flipping through them with mild disinterest. "But I do not really feel like watching any of these." "That is fine," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "We did not come all the way out here just to watch TV." She stood up and wandered over to a little corner nook where a small desk and chair sat tucked away. On top of the desk, a basket held a collection of travel guides and notebooks. "I was just curious," she said, pulling out one of the notebooks and flipping it open. "It could be fun to watch a scary movie in a cabin, though. Kind of fits the vibe, right?" I ran a hand through my hair and let out a quiet sigh. Lately, even casual conversations seemed to turn into emotional tightropes. "What is in the basket?" I asked, hoping to shift the conversation into safer territory. Jenna thumbed through the notebook, pausing on a page. "Looks like notes from people who stayed here before us." "Oh, hey, look, they left a photo of their dogs." She shoved the book toward me, holding it open so I could see the picture of 2 huskies grinning up at the camera. "Cute," I said, giving her a little nod. "Maybe we can write something nice about our trip too," she said wistfully, flipping through more pages. Sensing the mood starting to shift again, I nudged things in a different direction. "Hey, let's take a walk while it is still light out. It is barely drizzling, and I bet there are some cool rocks down by the river." Her face lit up, and just like that, she was off, practically bouncing back toward the living room. I hurried after her before she could get too far ahead, catching up just as she stepped out onto the back deck. I reached for her hand and she glanced back at me with a soft smile. "I am really glad we came," I told her, meaning it more than she probably realized. She squeezed my hand gently in reply, and for the first time in a long while, things felt okay. We made our way down the trail into the trees, with the river not far off. Before long, we reached the rocky shoreline. Jenna slipped her hand from mine and dashed ahead, stopping right at the water's edge. "I love it here," she whispered, glancing back at me over her shoulder. Her damp hair clung to her face, and for a moment, she looked exactly like the woman I had fallen for all those years ago. All the arguments, resentment, and distance between us seemed to vanish in that instant. I closed the gap between us, pulling her gently into my arms. She gave a small protest at first, but quickly melted against me, resting her head on my shoulder as she wrapped her arms around me. We stood there for a while, surrounded by the soft sounds of the river and the forest, and I allowed myself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe we could fix things after all. Then she stiffened suddenly and pulled away. "What is that?" she asked, her gaze drifting back toward the woods. I followed her, though I could not see anything unusual. Jenna knelt down by a patch of ferns, brushing some leaves aside. There, half buried in the damp soil, was a small leather-bound book. How the heck did you even notice that from all the way by the river? I asked, baffled. She glanced up at me, frowning. I do not know, I just saw it. She plucked the book from the ground, grimacing as she felt the wet leather. It is soaked. Well, it has been raining for days, I said. I am surprised it is not in worse shape. Maybe it hasn't been here long, she mused, flipping it in her hands. Let's take it inside and see what is in it. I opened my mouth to object, wanting to hold on to that brief moment of closeness we had shared by the river. But the determined look on her face stopped me. Once Jenna set her mind on something, arguing was a waste of time. Back at the cabin, we kicked off our muddy shoes at the door, and she curled up on the couch with the book in her lap. I flipped on the electric fireplace, warming the room with its glow, and grabbed one of the oversized towels from the bathroom. I thought maybe if I dried her hair for her, it could lead to something more intimate. When I returned to the living room, Jenna was lost in the pages of the book, her feet tucked underneath her. I sat down beside her, offering the towel with a smile. She barely noticed me at first, then took the towel absent-mindedly and tossed it onto the back of the sofa. Thanks, she muttered, her focus still glued to the book. My hopes for a romantic moment slipped away. This is weird, she said, mostly to herself. None of this makes any sense. She turned the book toward me, flipping slowly through the pages. The paper was tattered and burnt along the edges, with large reddish-brown stains scattered throughout. Strange symbols filled every page, interspersed with grotesque sketches. Flayed bodies, horned creatures, and other disturbing images. I frowned, shaking my head. It looks like some hipster art project, or maybe just a dumb prank. Come on, put that thing down, and let's enjoy some time together. Jenna pulled the book back into her lap, raising her hand to silence me. I want to keep reading it. I think it's interesting. Interesting? I said, rolling my eyes. It is disgusting, and you can't even read any of it. Come on, let me dry your hair for you. Forget the book. I said no, Caleb, she snapped, shooting me an irritated glare. And I can read some of it. The last page is in English. Look. She shoved the book toward me again, but I backed away, not wanting to engage with it any further. I don't care, Jenna. We came out here to spend time together, not to mess around with some creepy old book. Ignoring me completely, she began reading aloud. When darkness overtakes the day, that's when old Goo-Goo likes to play teeth so sharp, eyes so red. If you see him, you're good as dead. She looked up at me with a strange expression, but I just shook my head. Yeah, real spooky, I said dryly. I am going to make dinner. Feel free to join me whenever you can tear yourself away from your little ghost story. I do not think it is a ghost, she murmured, more to herself than to me. I think old Goo-Goo is something else. I wish I could understand the rest of this. Thankfully, Jenna finally closed the book when I set dinner on the table. She even joined the conversation, saying more than just one-word responses for a change. After we finished eating, she helped clear the plates, and for the first time since we arrived, things felt manageable. Maybe, just maybe, this weekend was not a lost cause after all. After dinner, we retreated to the bedroom, and while Jenna sat on the edge of the bed brushing her hair, I ran through ways to get the night back on track. If I played things right, maybe we could pick up where we left off earlier by the river. Just as I was building up the courage to say something, she froze mid-stroke, her brush caught in her hair. Wait, do you hear that? She asked, tilting her head to the side. What is that noise? I glanced up from my phone, listening carefully, but all I could hear was the steady patter of rain against the roof. It is just the rain. She frowned, still sitting motionless, her gaze distant. No, that's not it, she whispered, getting to her feet and walking over to the window above the little writing desk. She pressed her ear against the glass. It sounds different. Listen again. I strained to hear, but the only sounds were rain dribbling through leaves, the river running nearby, and the occasional snap of a tree branch. I'm telling you, it's just rain. No, it's not, she insisted, her voice tense. It sounds like licking, or maybe slurping, and every so often I hear something crunch. I sighed, trying not to let my frustration show. Wrapping her in my arms, I tucked her head beneath my chin. Babe, it's just the rain. You are not used to hearing it in the woods, that's all. That book got you all riled up. I brushed a few strands of hair from her face and cupped her cheek. Come on, let's lay down and maybe put on a movie. What do you say? Her worried expression softened slightly, and I silently thanked whatever luck was on my side. She turned, scanning the shelf before plucking out a DVD with a mischievous grin. You really want to watch a movie about people getting lost in creepy woods right now? I asked, chuckling. It fits the mood, she teased, popping the disc into the player and hitting play. I was going to argue, but she curled up next to me, resting her head on my chest. That little bit of warmth was enough to keep my mouth shut, so I leaned back and let myself get drawn into the disaster of horror-stricken film students on screen. When the movie ended and silence fell over the cabin once more, I felt Jenna stiffen against me. I still hear it, she whispered, her voice shaky. I pulled her closer, fighting the urge to groan out loud. It is just the rain, I repeated, kissing the top of her head. Come on, let's get some sleep. But she slipped out of my arms and went to the window again, pulling the curtain aside to peek out. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. There's something by the river, she whispered in horror, her hand gripping the curtain. I sighed, dragging myself out of bed to join her. Standing behind her, I squinted through the window. All I saw was the dark outline of trees and the glimmer of moonlight reflecting off the water. I do not see anything, I said gently, rubbing her arms. Come on, it is late. Let's get back to bed. No, she said urgently, pointing toward the riverbank. It is right there. It looks like a man, but it has horns and wings. I closed the curtain firmly and turned her to face me. Jenna, you are letting your imagination run wild. There is no one out there. I gave her a reassuring smile, hoping to ease her mind. Come back to bed, and I promise I will help you forget all about this. Her eyes flickered with doubt, but I could see her starting to waver. She bit her lip, lost in thought. Okay, she whispered at last. But give me a minute. I want to write this down in the guest book, just in case. That way, if anyone else hears the noises, they will know they are not crazy. I raised my hands in mock surrender. 5 minutes, then I want you right here with me. She grinned, biting her lip again, this time with a playful glint in her eye, and opened the guest book to jot down her thoughts. True to her word, she joined me shortly after, and for the first time that weekend, things felt good. The rain continued to drum steadily outside as I held her close. Just before sleep claimed me, I thought, with a small shiver, that the sound did in fact resemble something licking. The morning light filled the cabin as I woke up, feeling unusually well rested. The bed had been surprisingly comfortable, and I slept hard. No weird dreams, no interruptions. But the peaceful feeling didn't last. Fiona wasn't next to me. The curtains were open, and so was the bedroom door, so I figured she must already be up. I shuffled into the living area, expecting to find her making coffee or flipping through her phone. Instead, she sat on the couch, knees tucked against her chest, staring blankly out the window toward the river. Morning, babe, I said, leaning down to kiss the top of her head. Did you make any coffee? She didn't respond. Her eyes stayed glued to the window, her expression distant. I let out a small sigh and headed to the kitchen. Whatever calm had settled over her last night was already gone. I needed caffeine if I was going to figure out how to navigate her mood this morning. I filled the coffee maker and popped 2 English muffins into the toaster. As I turned around to grab a mug, I nearly dropped it. Fiona was standing right behind me, silent as a ghost. Jesus, Fiona, I gasped, pressing a hand to my chest. I didn't even hear you come in. She stared at me with an intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck rise. Why did you open the curtains? She asked, her voice sharp and accusatory. I blinked, caught off guard. What are you talking about? The curtains, Mark. Her words dripped with frustration. They were all closed when we went to bed. Why did you open them? I didn't open anything, I said, frowning. You were up before me. Are you sure they were closed last night? Yes, Mark, she snapped. You closed the bedroom curtain yourself. They were shut. But when I woke up this morning, every curtain in this cabin was wide open. My patience was wearing thin. I pinched the bridge of my nose, willing the coffee to brew faster. Look, maybe you opened them while you were sleepwalking. You haven't done that in years, but this is an unfamiliar place. No! She shook her head violently, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't open them, Mark. Please, just tell me you did. Please. Her voice cracked, and suddenly she was sobbing, clutching onto me as if her life depended on it. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling the fragile weight of her distress. "Hey, it's okay," I murmured, gently smoothing her hair. "You're safe. We're okay. It was probably just a dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream," she whispered into my chest. I pulled back slightly, wiping the tears from her face. "What do you mean? What did you see?" She looked up at me, her eyes wide with terror. "He was in the room, Mark. He was watching me." I forced myself to stay calm, even though my frustration was bubbling just below the surface. "Who, Fiona? Who was watching you? No one else is here but us." She stared at me with a haunted look, as if expecting me to understand without needing to explain. A figure, huge with horns and wings. He was standing in the corner by the desk, just watching, all night. He knows I read the book. "Babe, listen to me." I fought to keep my voice steady. "That sounds like a dream. And the thing with the curtains, it makes sense if you were sleepwalking." "It wasn't a dream," she shouted, stepping away from me. "He was there. I know what I saw. He knows." "Who knows, Fiona?" I threw my hands up in exasperation. "Who even knows where we are?" She stared at me, her face a twisted mix of fear and anger. "Old Goo-Goo," she whispered, her voice cracking with hysteria. Then she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood there for a moment, helpless and overwhelmed, as the anger simmered in my chest. This was exactly what I feared. Fiona slipping back into the same instability she'd struggled with for years. All the progress we'd made together felt like it was unraveling in an instant. I turned away from her and stormed into the living room, determined to put an end to the madness. The leather-bound book from the woods sat open on the coffee table, its pages filled with strange symbols and grotesque drawings. Those reddish-brown stains looked more like blood than ink, but I wasn't buying into it. It was all just some twisted joke, some hipster artist's idea of a creepy little project, and I wasn't about to let it ruin us. I reached out to grab the book, ready to toss it out into the rain, but before my fingers could touch it, Fiona's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. "Don't you dare!" she hissed, her grip surprisingly strong. I stared at her, startled. "How did you get over here so fast?" "The book stays with me," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Her eyes locked onto mine with a fierce, unsettling intensity. "Fiona, this is ridiculous," I said, trying to keep my voice even. Her lips stretched into a forced smile, strained, on the verge of something unhinged. "It's fine. I'm fine. Just don't take the book. I like it." I let go of the book and backed away slowly. The tension in her shoulders eased the moment I stepped back. In the kitchen, the toaster popped and the coffee maker gurgled as the last drops brewed. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling lost. "I don't know what to do, Fiona. I'm worried about you." She stepped closer, brushing her fingers lightly across my arm. "I'm okay. I just didn't sleep well, that's all." Her voice was calm, but there was a strange edge to it, like she was trying to convince both of us. "You were right. It must have been a dream. I'll be better the rest of the weekend. I promise." She kissed me softly, trying to reassure me, but it didn't quite land. The swings in her mood were too extreme, and the darkness in her eyes hadn't gone away. I knew then that we wouldn't make it through the weekend. Not like this. Maybe the best thing we could do was cut the trip short and get back to the city before things spiraled any further. But for now, I just nodded and gave her a small smile. "Okay," I said, "let's have breakfast." But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in the cabin, and that whatever had wormed its way into Fiona's thoughts wouldn't let us leave so easily. "I don't want to leave," Fiona said softly, as if she could read my mind. "I like it here. I want to stay with you. Let's go in the hot tub today. Let's have a fun day together." I hesitated, studying her closely. "Are you sure you're okay?" Her smile flickered, sincere but thin, as if held together by frayed edges. "Trust me, I've never been better." She reached for the strange book on the coffee table and hugged it close to her chest like a child with a favorite toy. Without another word, she disappeared down the hall, the bedroom door clicking shut behind her. I ran a hand through my hair and sighed, frustration gnawing at me. I had hoped this weekend might help us reconnect, but now that hope felt as fragile as glass on the verge of shattering. 2 hours later, she emerged from the bedroom, a spark of mischief in her eyes. She wore a red bikini that I had not seen in years and dangled my swimming trunks playfully in front of me. It felt like the old Fiona, teasing, spontaneous, lighthearted, and for a moment, I let myself believe everything might actually be okay. I ignored the warning bells in my head and changed into the trunks, following her out onto the back deck. The rain drizzled steadily, but the covered deck shielded us, and the hot tub bubbled warmly, steam rising into the chilly autumn air. I slipped into the water beside her, grateful for the silence as the jets hummed beneath us. We sat there side by side, watching the river flow beyond the trees, the tension between us easing with every passing minute. It was almost easy to forget the morning's strange outburst. I pulled her closer, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. "I love you," I said quietly. "You know that, right?" She nestled against me but kept her gaze fixed on the woods. "Of course I do. And I haven't given up on us," I added, my voice soft but firm. "I think—" Before I could finish, she jerked upright so suddenly that water sloshed over the edges of the tub. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice sharp with panic. My stomach sank. The delicate piece we'd found was unraveling. "See what, Fiona?" "There's nothing there." "There was something." Her eyes darted toward the tree line. "It was running through the trees." I groaned inwardly, biting back my frustration. "It was probably a deer or a bird. Come on, sit back down. I just want to talk to you." "No," she shook her head, her skin prickling with goosebumps as she stood. "It's getting closer. I can feel it." "Fiona," I started, but she was already climbing out of the tub, water streaming off her as she hurried toward the door. She slammed it shut behind her before I could even process what was happening. I sighed heavily and climbed out after her, following the wet footprints she left on the deck. Once we were back inside, her mood shifted again, softening like the rain outside. She let me dry her off with a towel, leaning into the simple gesture. I tried a few times to circle back to the conversation about us, about where we stood, but every time, she changed the subject or shut me down entirely. Eventually, I gave up and focused on making the most of the evening. We played a few board games and I cooked dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and garlic bread. For a while, things felt almost normal again, but as night fell, that uneasy feeling crept back in, and so did Fiona's paranoia. "Do you hear that?" she asked suddenly, looking up from the game we were playing. I exhaled slowly, trying not to sound exasperated. "It's just the rain." "No, not that," she insisted, her voice tense. "I mean, yes, the licking noise is back too. But listen, there's something else." I closed my eyes, straining to hear whatever she was fixated on. All I caught was the rhythmic patter of rain on the roof. "What am I supposed to be listening for now?" She stood and walked toward the glass door that led out to the deck. "It sounds like chanting," she whispered. "Can't you hear it?" I followed her and slipped my arms around her waist, resting my chin on her shoulder. "What are they chanting?" I teased gently. "Calling out for old Goo again?" She twisted her head to glare at me, her expression deadly serious. "I am not joking, Mark. Do you hear it or not? It sounds ancient, like another language." I listened harder, and for a moment I thought I heard something. A faint melody carried on the wind, but it could have easily been the hum of a distant stereo or the trickle of the river. "It's probably just someone playing music at one of the other cabins." "No, it isn't," she said flatly. "This isn't music." She pointed toward the woods, her voice a harsh whisper. "Look, do you see the red lights out there?" I peered into the darkness but saw nothing out of the ordinary. No lights, no figures, just shadows shifting in the rain. I reached around her and pulled the curtains closed, then kissed her neck softly. "Come on, let's go to bed." She stiffened and pushed me away. "You do not believe me." Her voice cracked with frustration. "Something is out there, and you do not even care." "Of course I care," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I care about you. I just want you to be okay." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Then listen to me, Mark. Something is watching me." I gently guided her away from the door and down the hall, closing the curtains in the living room as we went. Nothing is going to hurt you, babe. I am here, okay? We'll leave first thing in the morning. Everything will be fine. Do you trust me?" She sat at the small desk in the bedroom, her fingers tracing the edges of the cabin's guest book. For a long moment, she stared out the window into the woods. Then, without looking at me, she closed the curtains and opened the guest book, flipping to the back page. "I trust you," she whispered, though the words sounded hollow. She picked up a pen, ready to write another message for whoever came after us. But as I stood there watching her, a cold certainty settled in my gut. Whatever had a grip on Fiona, whether it was that damn book or something worse, was not going to let us leave without a fight. I gasped for air, but it was no use. Freezing water filled my lungs and panic clawed at me as I fumbled with the seatbelt. My limbs felt sluggish and numb from the cold, and every second dragged me closer to drowning. The red eyes glimmered above me, unwavering, slowly closing the distance between us like a predator savoring its prey. I thrashed, yanking at the seatbelt release, but it would not budge. The river swirled violently around the car, rocking it like a toy. I kicked at the window, my shoes slamming uselessly against the glass. Through the murk, I could see old Gugu's silhouette looming larger, his wings trailing in the water like tendrils of smoke. His face, if you could call it that, split into a grin filled with jagged teeth. The rhyme from the book drummed in my mind. "If you see him, you're good as dead." A sob tore from my throat, mixing with the icy river. This was it. I was going to die at the bottom of this river, and no one would know. Fiona would stay out there in the forest, lost to whatever darkness had claimed her, and I had failed her. I had abandoned her when she needed me the most. With a final burst of desperation, I reached for the strange necklace I had seen around her neck. The memory struck like a bolt of lightning, the bottle embossed with a winged creature. There had to be a reason she was wearing it. Something clicked in my mind. If that cursed book spoke the truth, maybe there was still a way out. Maybe Fiona had known, and I was just too blind to see it. The water was up to my neck now, the pressure crushing. My fingers, slick with river mud, fumbled in my pocket until I found what I needed, my pocket knife. With shaking hands, I flipped the blade open and sawed desperately at the seatbelt. The thin fabric fought me, but after what felt like an eternity, the belt gave way with a snap. I kicked hard, pulling myself toward the broken window. My lungs screamed, but I pushed through, dragging myself free of the sinking car. The current yanked at my body, tossing me like a rag doll. Through the churning water, I saw old Gugu descending, his glowing red eyes tracking my every move. The river's pull was strong, but terror was stronger. I swam with everything I had, kicking against the current until my fingers brushed the muddy riverbank. I clawed my way out of the water, gasping, coughing, retching onto the slick earth. I rolled onto my back and saw him, old Gugu, hovering just above the water's surface. His leathery wings flapped lazily, droplets of river water falling from them in slow, deliberate motions. He made no effort to follow me to shore, but his eyes glinted with cold amusement, as if he knew something I did not. And then I heard it, a voice, Fiona's voice, soft and distant, carried by the wind. "Mark." I turned toward the forest, toward the sound of her voice, and there she was, standing at the water's edge, the rain cascading down her bare skin, that strange necklace still hanging from her neck. She looked peaceful, as if all the fear and paranoia had drained from her. "Come back," she whispered. "It is okay now." I promise. I stared at her, my mind reeling. "Fiona?" She smiled. It was the same serene smile she had given me earlier that weekend, the one that had both soothed and unsettled me. Slowly, she extended her hand toward me. "You do not have to fight anymore," she said, her voice gentle and inviting. "He does not want to hurt you. He just wants you to understand." My heart pounded in my chest. I glanced back at old Gugu, still hovering over the water, then back to Fiona. There was no anger or fear in her expression, just a strange, eerie calm. The rain poured harder, drumming against the leaves and the river alike. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that if I took her hand, there would be no coming back. Whatever waited on the other side of that invitation was something beyond my understanding, something I might not survive, but at the same time, it was Fiona, my wife, and maybe, just maybe, she was right. Trembling, I reached out and took her hand. The moment our fingers touched, the world shifted. The rain stopped, the river fell silent. Even old Goo faded into the shadows, his glowing eyes winking out like embers in the dark. Fiona pulled me close, wrapping her arms around me, and suddenly I felt weightless, as if the fear, the confusion, and the exhaustion of the past few days had all melted away. "It is over now," she whispered against my ear, her voice a soothing lullaby. The forest seemed to breathe around us, its dark canopy swaying in rhythm with the pulse of the earth. I closed my eyes, sinking into her embrace. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to let go. When I opened my eyes again, we were no longer by the river. We stood together in the forest clearing, the moon shining bright above us, casting everything in a silver glow. Fiona smiled up at me, her eyes clear and bright. "See," she whispered, "you just had to trust me." I opened my mouth to speak, but then the forest shifted again. The shadows twisted, and I felt something stir deep in the pit of my soul. And that was when I realized the truth. I was never going home.